Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is Steve Fishell. He's going to share some stories from this wonderful book that he's written about the great Buddy Emmons.
Buddy Emmons was this absolute master virtuoso steel guitar player. The thing that was remarkable about him was that he also was an inventor. Just as much as he could play perhaps better than anyone, I felt he was the best. He also was a master mechanic, and he could take his steel guitar completely apart and reassemble it. Reassemble it, no problem. In a day in a motel room, which I heard stories about from those who toured with him. As a listener, you might be familiar with him from the song "Someday Soon" by Judy Collins. If you're an Emmylou Harris and Graham Parsons fan, you might be familiar with Buddy's playing on the GP album. He played on "That's All It Took." He played on "She," a couple of other tracks on that first GP solo album. He sort of came up through the world of incredible, legendary country stars. He played in Little Jimmy Dickens's band. He then played in Ernest Tubbs' band. He was in Dickens' band when he was 18 years old, by the way. He moved here the 4th of July weekend, 1955, when he was 18, and other than a radio show the night before, he debuted on the Grand Ole Opry with Little Jimmy Dickens, which is pretty stout.
His first ever Nashville gig?
That's right.
Wow.
Pretty amazing. And he became a legend overnight because he was that good. I'm a steel guitar player, so I know what I'm talking about when I say this. He was that good. Just to name a couple more people that he's worked with, he worked with John Sebastian. He worked with Linda Ronstadt on a number of tracks. Don't Cry Now. John Sebastian is Rainbows All Over Your Blues. You really want to check out that song. That's an amazing pass. And then, I know I'm jumping back and forth here, but what the heck? It's just us, right? He went from playing from Little Jimmy Dickens to Ernest Tubb to Ray Price, all within the span of from 1955 to 1962. He started playing with Ray Price. And these were all the top bands in Nashville at the time. These were the greatest road bands, and they all wanted to be associated with Buddy Emmons. They knew that if, he might have a little bit of a wild side to him, but if they got him in their band, that everybody's level of playing would be lifted by this guy's extraordinary talents. The technical part of him is just something else that we should talk a little bit about, because he was able to start two different steel guitar companies. One called Showbud with Shot Jackson in 1956, where they built these first Showbud guitars, and that became a standard in the industry, that particular company. And then later, he and a guy named Ron Lashley started the Emmons Guitar Company. Listening to Buddy Emmons is like looking at a Leonardo da Vinci painting. It's like going to an art museum. If you play a track, imagine, you're at an art museum and you're looking at this incredible piece of art, but instead you're listening to a piece of music, and it correlates in a way. Mastery when you hear it, and with Buddy, you're always hearing it. Well, he was born in Mishawaka. He was raised in South Bend. His dad worked at the Bendix factory, so working man, and they moved around a little bit, but got into steel guitar when he was 11 years old. His father encouraged him to play. They'd heard Don Helms on WSM on the Grand Ole Opry on a Saturday night, and Buddy was pretty stunned at the response to Hank Williams, which they apparently raised the roof, and he was kind of curious, but what are they yelling about? But he was especially curious about the steel guitar, although Buddy initially was probably more interested in regular guitar. But eventually, once he got a steel guitar and was practicing, he wanted to get out and see what was happening around town in the country bars. And so he would get on his bike when he was 14 before he could drive. You can imagine this on a hot summer night in Indiana. Gets on his bike and pedals across town to this place in Mishawaka at the Majorette Tavern in Mishawaka. And there was some resistance to including this photo, but I couldn't leave this out because it captures such a moment, where the crowd is rocking out. Buddy's 15, and he's playing a triple neck or a double neck Fender guitar, and he's just ecstatic. So Buddy remembered clearly what it was like when he'd be on his bicycle. They wouldn't let him in, of course, when he's 14 years of age. He's not getting in the bar. But he remembers the door swinging open and him looking across the room to the stage, and there's a honky-tonk band just stomping away in the corner, and there's a steel player playing a cream-colored Fender double-neck pedal or steel guitar, not a pedal steel. And he was just struck, and he said, I had to have that. I had to have one of those because he loved the sound. He loved the way it looked, just everything about it. He was drawn to it. So Buddy would ride his bike across town in the hot summer afternoon to get in position to be able to see that door swing open. Buddy was playing in Detroit at the time, and he'd been there for a little while. He'd been there for 6, 8, 10 months, playing in a band with a guy named Casey Clark, who was a local DJ, a local entrepreneur, a local live talent, and he had these barn dances on Saturday nights at this place in Detroit, near where the auto workers worked, near the factory. So there were a lot of working people there, and Buddy was like a local star at the time. But this was his emerging period. He was learning, he was growing. So Buddy was playing with Casey Clark on Saturday nights, and into town comes little Jimmy Dickens with his band. And his steel guitar player, Walter Haynes, I think that's correct. Oh, forgive me if I'm wrong, folks. I believe it was Walter Haynes at the time. After playing the first set, Walter Haynes became unable to play. I'm not sure exactly. There's different sides to the story. I don't want to take a side, but apparently he was unable to play for the second show. And so little Jimmy Dickens, who had seen Buddy play in the first half with Casey Clark opening up for them, ran over to Buddy and said, hey, my steel player is unable to play the set. Could you possibly sit in with us? And this is 10 minutes before they go on, right? Fortunately, Buddy knew little Jimmy Dickens' stuff, knew his material really well. And he dives into this. But as a player, I can tell you that this is a scary situation for anybody. It's somebody that Buddy really looked up to. This is a really well-known musician, artist that Buddy admires, not just because of the celebrity of them, but because he loves their music. And Buddy's all of 18 years of age. And so, but he has a lot of experience. He's played tons of bars for years, and that's where we all learn how to do whatever it is we do. We learn to improvise. You give a musician a key, and you say, okay, we're going to do Your Cheatin' Heart in G, and away we go. Kick it off, and the drummer gives you a tempo, and then everything from that point on, from the downbeat, is improvised. You might have a chord sheet, but you might not, especially on a bandstand. Fortunately, Buddy did know the Country Boys was the band that Dickens had as his backup band. Buddy knew the material. He didn't know the twin parts that the musicians would play together, but he knew enough where to lay out, when to step out. And so here's Buddy playing with this artist that he loves and admires in front of a hometown crowd in Detroit. And apparently it went really well. I have this vision that the hometown crowd was cheering Buddy on because they knew him, and they could see this is an unusual situation. But Buddy, when he was in the zone, like if we did an overdub in this room, and it was time for him to hit his solo, he kind of levitated. The first time I worked with him, he played this solo, and he kind of levitated like this at the moment that he was playing it. He just had this body language that he exerts that you watch him on videos, you can just see when he's hitting his stride, he's just, I don't know, he has this certain, I don't know how to describe it, but it's a charisma. He left an impression on little Jimmy Dickens, and Dickens afterwards came up to him and thanked him and said, listen, my steel player's thinking about leaving the band. If he does, could I give you a call? And Buddy said, oh my God, that'd be great. So they exchanged phone numbers, and sure enough, about a week later, little Jimmy Dickens called him. Well, I first met Buddy when I believe it was at a Farm Aid when I was on tour, probably in a motel room in Lincoln, Nebraska, in around 1985, with Albert Lee and several other members of the Everly Brothers band. When Buddy was playing with the Everly Brothers, we first met. I was quite intimidated. Buddy, has been somebody I've been listening to since 1972, and so to be in a motel room with him with some beer and hanging out was pretty daunting at first. But I tried to get comfortable with the situation, and I had been a longtime friend of Albert's, so that helped a lot too. But eventually we crossed paths here in Nashville. I got into record production around a year or two after that time, around '88, and moved here from Los Angeles. I'm not one of those musicians that, hey, I'm going to play on everything that I'm producing. Au contraire, I want to hire everybody here. I want to hire. I hired Weldon Myrick. I brought in Tom Brumley. You can just go down the list. Everybody that I possibly could work with. Paul Franklin. Eventually Dan Dugmore when he moved here in '92. It was just a goal of mine to be around all of this incredible talent here in Nashville. I eventually called Buddy Emmons for a session. It was for a record for a lady named Jan Brown. It was her second album, and this would have been 1990. And he came down, and there's Buddy Emmons. Here he comes. He's walking in, and it's just a no big deal situation. We'll get into his personality in a minute. He's a man of very few words, but I kind of knew that from the hotel room situation. So, and I know as a steel player, when you're setting up, you don't want to be spoken to. You've got a lot of stuff to manage, unless you've got an entourage of 3 people to help you set up, which Buddy did not, of course. I think he had a van. He had a van that he could open up, and he had his pedal steel already set up in his van and strapped in very wisely, and so that he would just undo the springs and pull the guitar out and bring it on. It was rather rapid the way he had it down to a science, right? But nonetheless, you're setting up, and then you have to tune it. Tuning a steel guitars can be quite stressful, to say the least. But nonetheless, he set up, and it was an overdub session, and it went great. But I found it really easy to communicate with him. He was all pro. It was more like, what can I do to help this cause? How can we get these songs across as best way possible? Because the song is always what matters, and the vocal, you learn to dance around that vocal, and he was the master at this, obviously. So it was really cool. It was really smooth and easy. But you learn to adjust to his method of communication, which is very minimalist. Didn't say very much. At this second session, which was at the Sound Emporium, I had done a track already, and I wanted him to overdub on this track, and I had played an Emmons lick. So I played him my version of this steel guitar pass. It was on the C6 tuning, which is not my strength. So I was a little bit nervous about it. I was more than a little bit nervous about it. And he picked up on that. So I think he decided to have a little fun. So I played him the solo. He looked at me, didn't say a word. He got up. I won't get up. He got up without saying a word and reached into his steel guitar seat. Steel players use these seats now they're called a pack-a-seat that's got everything in it, volume pedals and chords. And so reaches in, pulls out a card, hands it to me without a word. And I look at the card, and it has his trademark derby, like a little insignia of the derby on it. And below it says this in quotes, "I really dig what you're trying to play." And so we all just cracked up. We just burst out laughing. And what was once a nervous session was now a very relaxed and calm session because Buddy showed that he had a sense of humor. This was an awkward situation perhaps, but he knew what he needed to do, And he liked to tease people. He really liked to tease people a lot. He said very little. I honestly think he could have been a great stand-up comedian. What I ended up doing the last couple of days in preparation for this time with you was I went ahead and dug out some Buddy-isms from back emails, things that weren't in the book. Well, at one point during the making of the book, I was a little bit, because he quit a couple times, when we made this book. I was worried that I had said something that he had mistaken or misunderstood me, because I hadn't heard from him in a couple days, which is common, which was really common communication with Buddy. So I wrote to him, Biggie. Oh, I called him Biggie. We had nicknames for each other. He knew who Biggie Smalls was, the rapper. Yeah. And so one day, for fun, I just referred to him as Biggie rather than the Big E. And he got that completely, and he loved that, because he didn't really want to be the Big E. He just wanted to be a regular person like everybody else. So anyway, Biggie. I regret coming on so strong in my previous email. Buddy, I reviewed the last 2 emails and couldn't find anything strong, so I guess you're off the hook. That's just a typical Buddy response all the time. He was really dry. It was kind of like maybe talking to Humphrey Bogart, but at half speed, because he didn't communicate as much verbally as he did with his music, and he didn't really want to. He was an only child. He wanted to be able to connect with you from his heart through the music that he was playing, and that was how he communicated best. And when we did meet, we eventually got into some interviews. I recorded them. It always helped that we would have a little bit of alcohol involved to kind of loosen things up a little bit. But I could get him to talk. It took a little while, but I got him to a point where he was comfortable, and he would just look off into the space and just talk. We all have our favorites in terms of the steel guitar. Personally, this will surprise people, I'm as big a fan of Sneaky Pete's as I am of Buddy Emmons. I love Ralph Mooney. I love Rusty Young, who played with Poco. I love Tom Brumley, who played with Buck Owens. I love John Huey, who played with Conway Twitty. Such an incredible touch that he had. I love Paul Franklin. What a master he is. Tommy White, who's a friend of mine. I just love the way he plays. Dan Dugmore today is one of my all-time favorites. There's so many players. I heard Pete Drake driving in today. I heard Pete Drake on All Things Must Pass, George Harrison, on the Beatles channel. And it's Pete Drake, and I go, oh man, he's playing like the perfect part. This is just wonderful. And of course, I have to mention Lloyd Green, and I have to mention J.D. Maness. Lloyd Green, whenever I get lost and can't remember how to play vibrato and use the volume control, I'll listen to Lloyd, because I just get something out of Lloyd that I don't get anywhere else, and it just inspires me to do a better job. J.D. Maness played on the Sweetheart of the Rodeo record with Lloyd Green, and J.D. I used to go see play at the Palomino Club in Los Angeles all the time when I was learning, and man, he played things like nobody else could play. He was one of those top 5 favorites. If you're going to make a list, if you're going to make the short list, JD's up there. It's just so hard to come up with a list of top favorites because every steel player plays individually in their own way, and you get something from all of them, But if there's one guy who you had to look to as more than likely at the top of everyone's list in terms of admiration, in terms of not just technique, but also for being able to pull the right note out at the right time and to support the song rather than to try to draw attention to himself, to be able to just play this perfect little part that fits right into this track in a magical way that you didn't expect, it's going to be Buddy Emmons. They used to refer to him as the foremost pedal steel player in the world. To me, he was certainly my favorite. But again, as I began this piece, I want to qualify it with so many other names that I love to listen to. Ralph Mooney, yes. You know, I get really excited when I listen to Ralph Mooney, but I get really excited when I hear Buddy Emmons too. Let's just put it this way. Buddy was a really difficult person to get to know. I got close to him, and so he felt comfortable around me, and he could be honest with me. And whenever he had to be honest with me, he would kind of make a joke about it. Said, well, this is going to require honesty from both sides, and I'm doing my best to hold up my end of the bargain. He wrote that to me one time. But I had a friend named Tom Wheeler, who was the Guitar Player magazine editor for many years, and he wrote many great books about the guitar. Just search Tom Wheeler. And he challenged me. He said, I want to be in Nashville in 1960. Take me there. I want to be there. And so that was my mantra. You know, I tried several times to take people right into the recording studio and what it was like with the smoke-filled room and, you know, charts fluttering around and the producer talking on the talk back and nerves, and because Buddy got really nervous during sessions. But I digress. Sorry. I wanted to take it just a minute and read something that I've never read anybody, because Buddy quit on this project. We worked on this together for 8 months, and we worked side by side, mostly emails, but we would get together and have lunches, usually over Long Island iced teas. That was a challenge for me. I enjoy a drink, but boy, Long Island iced teas, and we always started at 11:30 in the morning. So yikes! So I had to hold on for dear life, but I measured up, I think, and so Buddy liked me, and so we kept going. But after a while, he realized that I'll just read this to you. He quit twice, and this was the first time he quit. And I was able to work through this, and we eventually got the book done. He never saw it, but he gave me his blessing. But here's what he said. I'm sorry, Fish, but I'm going to have to throw in the towel. After answering a couple of your questions Saturday, I drifted back into that frame of mind I developed while writing the previous bio, because he had written an autobiography about 70, 75 pages back in the 80s. He made notes, right? It was with me all day Sunday, too, so I thought it was time to let you know. This is sad, everything I've ever cared for deeply about is gone. And all that matters today are the good memories, without reminders of my past hovering in the background. It was some of the best and some of the worst years of my life as a musician, but I can't seem to separate the two, so I'm hoping you'll understand. And then he goes, but P.S., I'm also hoping this doesn't affect our lunch date. Not too soon, though, as I'm in dire need of a haircut. So he always ended, in a light way, but he bailed, and this was just about 3 weeks going in. But then he came back around, and he got comfortable with the idea again, and he wanted to have something to show for all of our work. So then we went all the way through 2010 until December of 2010, and then again he bailed, and that's noted in the book. And he ended up writing something on the Steel Guitar Forum so that people understood that we didn't have a falling out. Au contraire, Buddy just couldn't continue for these very same reasons. He was spending hours at night at 3 a.m. pacing the floor smoking. He smoked a lot to begin with, so now he was really smoking a lot. And I respected him so much, and the last thing I wanted to do was affect his health over this, right? Come on, he should be able to retire in peace. If this isn't comfortable for him, I'm cool. So I just backed off for like a year or two, and then eventually he came back around and he said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll give you the rights to my memoirs if you promise me you don't publish until after I'm gone. And that was our agreement. And so I stuck to it, and I was honored that he would trust me with that legacy of his. Emmons was human, and very, very much so. And this was one of many things that I took away from this that I didn't expect to learn until after we got into this. And once I saw his memoirs, I realized he was very, very hard on himself. He was a perfectionist. He didn't think he was anything really super special, which is kind of shocking. I just looked up to him as this savant, this Buddha figure. Idolized him, and he never demonstrated anything musically that would cause you to doubt that belief that he was this great musician, this wizard, this magician, as Herb Peterson once referred to great players as magicians. But he had this extraordinarily deep talent that was unlike anybody else, and he just stood apart from everybody else. And he also had that extraordinary mechanical ability. I still don't understand how, as you said, he could work on both sides of his brain so brilliantly. But he had a dark side, and he was very quiet and very inward, and he got uncomfortable a couple times. Yeah, but he was human. But he viewed himself as a flawed individual. And so I learned a lot about another side of him that I didn't expect. But you know what? We're all human, folks. And, join the party, right?